Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Double Dose of Dilaudid, Real Stories from a Small Town ER by Kerry Hamm, narrated by Donna Postel. Welcome to a small-town emergency room in Ohio, with 6 trauma bays, 1 mental health room, 1 low-pressure room, 1 quarantine room, and 11 other exam bays. This ER has the capacity to fit 21 patients at a time, with more than 100 patients often lining up in the lobby and waiting room on any given evening shift. We're no big-shot inner-city hospital. We transfer out burns and severe pediatric cases. We have a mental health floor, inpatient rehab, intermediate care, critical care, and hospice floor, in addition to pediatrics, general surgery, obstetrics, and nursery floors. Unless patients are directly admitted from facilities in surrounding areas, they show up in our department first. Typically, we don't see many gunshot wounds or stabbings, but what does come through the doors keeps us all on our toes. My name is Kerry, and I'm the first person you'll see when you come through those ER doors. Registration. 2 to 3 clerks work during the day and evening shifts, taking turns gathering names, birth dates, and diagnoses at the front, while juggling floor transfers, admits from surrounding hospitals, and outside phone calls from some cat lady named Linda, who's making her 3rd call this shift to see if we think she needs to come in for tingling in her left butt cheek. And then in the back, where we enter patients' rooms to gather contact and insurance information to complete the registration process. Once 11 p.m. hits, I wave to my coworkers as they walk out the door, and I'm left at the registration desk with a triage nurse in a small room behind the desk, security lurking behind a 2-way mirror that takes up an entire wall in front of the registration desk, a not-so-empty waiting room to my right, and 6 registered nurses and 1 or 2 doctors in the back. Every story here is true, though dialogue has been changed slightly, all names have been changed, and some situations have been slightly altered to protect patient privacy. Prancing in the Pumpkin Patch. There were 4 days left until Halloween night, and the mid-Ohio weather had chilled substantially in comparison to the 70 degrees we were feeling the week before. Patients presenting injuries sustained outside waned off considerably with the dropping temperatures. To be honest, I couldn't recall coming across such an injury all week, and staff members welcomed the change, fully knowing we would be slammed from floor to ceiling with patients once ice and snow came along just a few weeks later. With an hour left on the last shift of my week-long stretch, I headed to the back and grabbed my card. The tracking board was not overloaded, but there were enough rooms to keep me busy for a good half hour. I was tired and sore. The last thing I wanted to do was walk from room to room, exposing myself to all of the cold and cough diagnoses that seemed to be the chief complaint of nearly all the patients I needed to see. I scanned the board for the nearest room, but my attention darted back to the center of the board. The diagnosis was a simple one: injury to left ankle. Never one to shy away from an injury, I dragged my card over to the patient's room. The 30-something-year-old female had been placed in a room reserved for less urgent traumas. "Registration," I announced when I knocked on the door. "You can come in." She sounded nice and free of pain. Her room's overhead lights were turned off, and she was sitting upright in her bed. As I moved further into the room, the patient used her remote to mute the television that was suspended in the upper left corner. She smoothed over her thick, wiry brown hair with the palm of her right hand, before scratching at the tip of her nose. Her almond eyes were tired, and her eyelids heavy. She pushed the fleece-lined sleeves of her gray sweatshirt to her pointy elbows. "So, did I break it?" she asked with a brittle chuckle. She nodded to her left ankle. The left leg of the patient's jeans was rolled up in a bulge to her knee, exposing her smooth, milky leg and swollen red joint. I shrugged. Sorry, but they don't really tell me much. I'm mostly in charge of making sure your address and insurance information is accurate so your bill doesn't get sent to your house. She nodded in understanding. Bet you're wondering what I did, huh? Of course I was. She was reading my mind. I glanced to her ankle and ran through a few scenarios. The patient tripped as she was going down the stairs. She was walking her dog and it took off, wrapping its leash around her ankle. She was playing softball with work colleagues and stepped down the wrong way. There were dozens of ways she could have injured herself, but I wasn't quite prepared for what really happened. Well, I said, we do have to go over an accident screen. Do you want to do that part first? The patient nodded. I clicked and clacked at my keyboard and mouse until I reached the accident screen page. Okay, I chirped. Did this happen at work? Nope. Pumpkin patch. I nodded. Okay. And what happened? Did you just trip? The patient began laughing hysterically, embarrassed by what she was about to tell me. She grabbed at her stomach. Oh, she said with a grin, I think that counts as a workout. I smiled and hoped her story was as good as she thought it was. Well, she said, I have 9 kids. 9 kids? I exclaimed. Wow, you must have such a busy life. Now, I wasn't judging the patient, but I sure was trying to do the math in my head. 2 sets of twins, and the newest one is 6 months tomorrow. And my husband decided he wanted to go sow some oats with his girlfriend, so he moved out, and I've been doing the best I can. I nodded. Wow. Yeah, and with Halloween coming up? Well, you know, pumpkins are expensive. I mean, how is it fair that the good pumpkins are like $6 a piece? If every kid got a pumpkin and then I got one, I'm looking at $60 at least, just for the pumpkins. I'm a single mom. I work 60 hours a week, and most of my pay is taken out in taxes. I was just trying to give my kids the best Halloween. I knew to keep my mouth shut. She was having a moment and was afraid of being judged. Little did she know, I didn't care about the rest. I just wanted to know what really happened. My mom said she'd watch the kids tonight, she explained, and my sister said she'd go with me. So we went out to the pumpkin patch after dark. You know, it's that one right off the highway outside of town. I didn't know, but I nodded anyway. I figured, who's going to miss a few pumpkins? She looked to me for a response when she asked, Well, am I right? My eyes widened and I nodded nervously, but I hid my unease with a bright smile. Well, yeah, I mean, nobody would probably even notice, right? It's not like you were hurting anyone. Exactly, she said loudly, relieved to hear someone agreed with her. Well, she continued, we were walking around, right? Looking for pumpkins? But then we saw a cop car. Uh-oh. She rolled her eyes. Yeah. When we saw it, we tried to run. What am I supposed to do if I get arrested? It was a rhetorical question. Okay, she said with a smile. So this car turned towards us, and I did the only thing I knew to do. I ran. Well, she hesitated. I tried to run. She pointed to her ankle. And that's when my foot got caught on a vine. The patient smacked her palms together. Bam! I went down. Did the cop stop? I asked. She laughed so hard her cheeks turned red, and she wheezed. No, she replied. Turns out it wasn't even a cop. It was someone else there to do the same thing I was doing. The patient left with a badly sprained ankle and a cushioned boot. We estimated the cost of her visit at close to $3,000. Natural selection. About a week after the pumpkin patch incident, I was in the back, trying to catch up on the overwhelming number of patients visiting the emergency room. Every room I tried to enter had a doctor or nurse inside, except for one with a diagnosis of attacked by a skunk. Now, I had seen other strange animal diagnoses. Attacked by a chicken. Still, to this day, I recall playing Zelda games on my Nintendo Game Boy, swinging Link's sword at a few chickens until they became overly frustrated and finally pecked away one of my lives. Charged by a cow, and one of my favorites, knocked down by a puppy. I had never, though, had the opportunity to speak to anyone attacked by a skunk. I wondered what the patient's definition of attack was, and then I raised my nose to the air and sniffed, trying to pick up on stinky scent as I wheeled my cart to the nurse's station directly outside the patient's door. "Did they say how it happened?" I questioned the unit clerk. She was thumbing through a lopsided pile of paperwork and shook her head. "I don't smell it," I noted. "Did it spray him?" She shook her head again. "Nope, I guess it just bit him." "Was it a pet?" "Nope." "Well," I said sarcastically, "it's not like skunks give us a sign to stay away from them, like spraying." The unit clerk laughed. "Well, let me know what happened when you find out. We've been taking bets on what the guy was doing." I knocked on the door and was welcomed to enter. The patient was a 40-something-year-old male. His once white T-shirt, now stained by blotches of old mustard and oil, was drenched in smelly sweat. The man's wide forehead was glossy, and his skin was beet red. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and with each breath, his large stomach jiggled. "Hi," I said. "I'm here from registration." "Am I going to die from this?" he worriedly questioned. I bit my lower lip and felt my eyebrows and forehead scrunch. I wanted to mess with him and say grimly, "I'm afraid it doesn't look good." But I didn't. "I think there would be a few more doctors and nurses in here if they thought you were going to die," I truthfully responded. He held up his left hand and showed me the bite mark. There were several pink puncture wounds to the flesh between his sausage thumb and index finger. The area was so red it appeared to be burned, and pus was already oozing from the man's wounds. "Look what the thing did," he ordered angrily. "How did this happen?" I asked cautiously. The man took a deep breath, which was followed by a series of whooping coughs. "See," he said, "I was walking behind Walmart." "Like just to walk?" I interrupted. "Or were you looking for something?" He shook his head. "I was just walking off steam. My truck broke down. I think it's the damn fuel pump. But anyway, I was waiting for the tow truck to come. I saw this skunk hanging out by the dumpster, right? So I called to it." The man mimicked his calls to the wild animal by smooching his lips and clicking his tongue. "Did it come to you?" He nodded. "Yep, the thing just walked right up to me." The patient's claim concerned me, especially because our location was considered to be rural. Most people in the area possess common knowledge regarding wildlife. For example, most small animals in the area usually shy away from humans unless they are conditioned to human presence via feeding. Or the most alarming concern, the animals have rabies. Judging by the patient's story, he was not concerned when the animal approached him. "And then it attacked you? Was it a baby?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nope. I leaned down and it let me pick it up. Wasn't a baby either. It was the size of my wife's cat, I think it was." My mouth fell open in awe. "You picked up a wild skunk?" And then he looked at me like I was stupid. "Well, yeah, it came right to me." "And then it bit you," I said dryly. I had meant to ask a question, but it simply didn't happen that way. "Not right away," he gently argued. "See, I was petting its head and stroking it around the ears. So then I tried to pet its back and—" The man whipped his head to the left and chomped at the air. "It took a good chunk from my hand. I'm telling you," he said, "that I threw that thing so hard, it's probably over in Illinois right now." I moved to nod. "And now," said the patient, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And everyone's going to remember me as the guy who got killed from a skunk bite." He was becoming panicky and loud. The man squirmed in bed and retched. "This stuff they gave me isn't working. I think they gave me something like 13 shots, and none of it's working. You gotta tell someone that I'm dying. You'll get someone for me, right?" "As soon as we get through your chart," I promised. "I'll ask your nurse to come see you. Would that be okay?" The man agreed. In the end, the patient received 16 shots. The good news? He didn't die, and as he was waiting in the lobby for his wife to come pick him up, he swore he'd never attempt to pick up another skunk again. Penis problem. Near the end of one of my overnight shifts, a man walked through the front door and approached the counter. There was a deep level of pain expressed on his 40-year-old face, but I couldn't tell what was ailing the man. He didn't nurse either arm or favor a certain leg. He didn't clutch at his sides or place his hand over his heart. "I need to see a doctor," he announced in a broken voice. I took the man's name and date of birth. "Do you have a primary physician?" I asked. He shook his head, and I noticed a bead of sweat roll down his smooth forehead. His eyes were clear, and he didn't reek of alcohol, so I figured he wasn't drunk or high. "And what seems to be the problem this morning?" The man hesitated. "I'd rather not say." "Sir," I assured the patient, "anything you say will not be judged or repeated. But I have to put something in the diagnosis screen so our charge nurse can assign the proper room for your needs." He looked away and repeated, "I'd just rather not say. I don't want anyone to laugh." I prepared myself for the typical diagnoses of someone who utters those words. Usually the patient at the desk shies away and finally mentions something like pain during urination, or something equally embarrassing to the patient, but nothing I haven't heard before. "We're here to help you," I calmly stated. "None of our staff members will laugh at you. And," I encouraged him, "we've heard it all. There's nothing you can say to me that someone else hasn't told me." His toffee eyes met mine for but a moment. The man then looked to the tile floor. He whispered, "My penis hurts." I nodded. "Okay. Now, if you can just sign the top line of our consent form so we can treat you, a nurse should be up for you in just a moment." The man signed the consent form, and I signed as a witness. Before I even placed a label on the form, a nurse had appeared from the back. She was patiently waiting to lead the man to a room. "I don't want people to laugh at me," he said to her. The head nurse on duty that night was, and still is, the kindest, most professional nurse I've ever met. She didn't break the slightest smile, but instead shook her head and told the man, "Absolutely not. We're here to help." I made a copy of the man's consent form. Before I could sit down again, he and the head nurse disappeared to the back. I sat down and greeted hospital employees arriving for the start of their 6 a.m. shifts. The phone rang. I immediately recognized the number as coming from the charge nurse's phone. "What you need?" I asked, believing I had forgotten something or had made a mistake. "I need you to stop what you're doing and come back here to get that last patient's information," she said hurriedly. He's going to surgery as soon as you're done." "But it hasn't even been 5 minutes," I noted aloud. "I know, but it's serious. I'll send someone up to watch the desk so you can come back here. I really need you to see if he has an emergency contact." I replied, "Okay, I'll come back right now." In all the time I worked at the hospital, the quickest discharge happened 20 minutes after the patient arrived. The closest urgency to gather information, aside from this patient, came from a heart patient coding on the way to the hospital, and even then family members were waiting in the lobby to give the patient's information. To say I was surprised at the urgency with this patient would be an understatement. I was purely flabbergasted. When I arrived in the back, most of the nurses were huddled at the center island. Some were giggling. All were whispering. "What is going on right now?" I asked as I broke the circle. The head nurse addressed me. "The patient is going to emergency surgery as soon as you're finished getting his information." "For penis pain?" I questioned in disbelief. "He's got something stuck in it," another nurse commented. I needed a second. "Stuck in it?" I cringed. The nurse nodded. "He shoved a pen cap up there. Now it's stuck and it's creating problems." I was still trying to catch my breath. The man has a pen cap stuck in his penis? How? Why? I cocked my head. "You're kidding me, right?" The head nurse shook her head and directed me to the patient's room. "No, we're not kidding you. Stuck it in there with the pointy side down." "But even the top of a pen cap is sharp." I cringed. The nurse nodded. "I need you to see if he has an emergency contact. Tell me as soon as you're finished, and then we'll get him moved to surgery." As soon as I entered the patient's room, I wiped the expression of puzzlement from my face. Tending to business as usual, I gathered information from the patient and acted as if I didn't have a clue as to why he was in the emergency room. "And would you like to add a next of kin or an emergency contact?" I asked. The man flailed about in his bed, so much that his blue and white hospital gown twisted around his bare legs. "Nobody can know about this." The man pointed his finger at me menacingly. "Nobody can know about this. Do you hear me?" My glance darted from one side of the room to the other. I replied nervously. "Okay. I can't notify anyone without your permission, sir." He relaxed. "I'm sorry. Look, I'm sorry for yelling at you. It's just, if my girlfriend finds out that I'm here, and if she finds out why I'm here, she's going to kick me out." The patient pointed over to a chair on the far side of the room. His jeans and t-shirt were both neatly folded atop the furniture. "My keys are in my pocket," he told me. "Can you maybe move my truck to a different lot so my girlfriend doesn't drive by and see it?" No," I replied. "Sorry, but I can't do that." "But if she knows it's happened again, she's going to make me leave." I don't know exactly what happened to the patient. He was wheeled out of the ER right after I left his room and gave the head nurse a face sheet containing current patient information. And I clocked out of work shortly after speaking with him. I haven't seen the man since. Staff members each had a thought of why the man shoved a pen cap into the tip of his nether region, but none of us ever knew for sure the patient's reasoning. Based on a true story. "Hey, isn't this movie based on a true story?" asked a patient. He pointed to the television. "All of this stuff really happened someplace, right?" I looked to the television and then back to the patient. I blankly stared at him for a moment, before realizing he was serious. "Yep," I replied, hiding my amusement. "I do believe it is." He snapped his fingers and said gloatingly to his wife, "See? I told you it really happened. That movie was The Green Mile. Accidents happen. On a somewhat slow evening shift, a mother rushed to the registration desk. She was in tears and was holding an infant in her arms. "What happened?" my coworker asked before even asking for the patient's name. The woman motioned to her relaxed child. "We were at home and she fell off the bed. Her head hit the floor so hard that my mom heard it from the kitchen. I don't know how. I was sitting right there. Please, you have to help her." I glanced up and the baby smiled at me. Through tears and shouting, the mother gave the child's information to my coworker. Soon a nurse appeared and walked the mother and child back to an exam room. "She was really freaking out," I commented to my coworker. "But the baby seemed to be doing okay, yeah?" "Yeah," he replied, "but I guess it's better to be safe than sorry." I agreed and went about my business. Not too long after the patient was registered, I headed to the back to gather information from the child's mother. As usual, I knocked on the door and identified myself. The mother invited me in, and I pulled up the patient's chart. It was instantly clear that the mother was disinterested in registration. She sat at the head of the bed and tapped at the screen of her phone. Her child scooted around the center of the bed. The rails to the bed were down, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't just slightly nervous at the setup. Each time I asked the patient's mother a question, I had to repeat it twice more. "Sorry," she laughed. "I'm just trying to keep up with all these Facebook comments." "It's not a problem," I lied. I continued with my questions and stared at my screen until the mother would pry her attention away from her phone long enough to finally answer. As I reached the last question, I found myself feeling excited to leave the room. "Well," I announced, "I'm finished. So I'm going to make sure the nurses out there get a copy of your paperwork." Oh my God. The patient's mother didn't even look up. I rushed to the bedside and caught her child in mid-air. In an attempt to explore, the baby crawled to the edge of the bed and was in the process of falling 4 feet to the hard tile floor. "Looks like we almost had another accident," I chuckled nervously. I placed the baby back on the bed. "Oh," said the mother distractedly. "Thanks for catching her. Maybe I should let her crawl around on the floor until it's time to go." Midnight madness. It was the second-to-last shift of my work week, and I was grateful that the pace had died down. All week, every shift was unbelievably busy and nearly impossible to keep up with. As the only overnight clerk on duty, I was left with leftover work from previous shifts. Finally, a few minutes after 4, I realized all of my work was caught up, and I could take a few minutes to myself. No sooner than I filed away my paperwork and sat down, a man walked through the front doors. He held his arms close to his chest, with his hands outstretched. I couldn't help but to be reminded of a T-Rex. "Help," the man groaned. I stood. A woman, with her shoelaces untied and dragging under her sneakers, rushed inside and shouted through sobs, "He just jumped out in front of my car. I didn't know what else to do, I swear. He just came out of nowhere and was in front of my car as I was driving." Believing the man was hit by the woman's vehicle, I moved in closer. When I looked to his hands and scanned over the rest of his badly bruised and burned body, I knew it was a moment I needed immediate help from the triage nurse. "Wanda," I called to the back. For the patient's sake, I tried to keep my tone even and my volume just loud enough for the nurse to hear. But when I did not receive an answer, I shouted out more urgently, "Wanda, we really need help out here." The triage nurse emerged from the exam room located behind the registration desk. As she neared the patient, she saw what I saw. The man had no skin left on his hands or forearms. There was skin missing from his nose and both cheeks, and his shirt was melted to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?